Good afternoon. My name is Michael Kirsch, and I have been nationally coordinating the NAWAPA project as that which could turn the tide of general collapse of the United States, plant shutdowns, deterioration of our infrastructure system. If you take a look at the census reports, National Census Bureau reports from 1950s to the present day, you see the process very clearly over this whole period. But what I'd like to start out with today is that I here, standing at the podium, see the future in this room. And usually it is an older man standing at the front of a room looking at a group of young people, telling them that he sees the future in them. But today's consideration is a bit different because the world that we find ourselves in is with a generation of youth, and I'll speak for my generation, I'm 29 years old, which would never build a project like NAWAPA. Even if they really wanted to, and they found out 10 years from now that they really wanted to build NAWAPA, the experience of a big project, something which we've seen in our nation's history, something which requires the kind of know-how and deep knowledge of interconnected system, is not something that exists in the experience of the current generation. Now, it's not, I would say it's not our fault, but we can discuss that later. But the will to do anything like this neither exists in the baby boomer generation. And I'm going to speak about where we find ourselves with which is a 40-year gap of doing anything that would contribute to the next generation, which we've never seen in our nation's history. The longest gap we've had was after McKinley's assassination to Franklin Roosevelt, and that was only 30 years. If that change had not happened then, there would also be no nation today. But now we're in a much graver crisis for precisely this reason of the break in the continuity of generational knowledge. And so the future lies in this room, particularly with men in their 80s. And if we don't utilize the knowledge that exists in that generation now, it'll be gone. And the prospect is very terrifying to see a group of 20, 30-year-olds who are tasked with putting forward the future of the nation when they don't know how to fix the plumbing in their own house, to say the least. So that is where we find ourselves. Now, with the group of men in this room and across the nation, we've had an ongoing discussion around designing a scientific recovery plan. Not just a recovery plan that's based on something within the current existing monetary considerations of budgeting, but something that is capable of meeting the standards of a true economic recovery. And I'm going to define today what are the standards of an economic recovery. What are the scientific standards? And why it is that NAWAPA meets that standard. Now, the will to generate a new project is something that lies within the human mind, which is capable of considering a new idea before that idea has ever been seen visibly by the evidence of your senses. Now, some of you in this room are familiar with the technology of machine tools, which are something which we were supposed to use in the post-war period to rebuild the world. Machine tools are the machines that are capable of building any other machine that you actually buy for your factory. They're the machines that make every other machine, and they're the machines that make new ideas discovered in the laboratory actualize themselves into reality. That capability of the mind, which is actually also something which any scientist does that makes a discovery, they build a machine to see if that principle is valid. And that's in the case of the whole history of geometry, different curves that are involved in the calculus, and as we all know with the discoveries in atomic physics. That capability is the unique resource of an economy. We have not been using that capability in the economy. And our responsibility in this room is that we will into existence an idea which also does not yet exist visibly in front of us, the NAWAPA project. A project which we can see in our minds would have a certain effect. But that idea, the power of it to move a current society to enact the idea, will depend on a number of factors, one of which is how gripping and living the idea is. And it is my intention that the idea of NAWAPA becomes something which is, in contrast to the current situation and crisis, we can name a number of them, capable of overturning the current axiomatic system. Because it's really not enough to try to sit back and say, we'll wait for the conditions to be right. Right? We'll wait for the conditions politically to be right. That's what the Congress does, and we've seen their success with that strategy. They say, not this election, we'll wait till the next one. We'll wait, we'll see what happens, and then we'll move, but we won't try to fight for Glass-Steagall until after the election. Now, we've seen what happened to the Democratic Party in this last election, and that is exactly what they told us. But this general strategy of waiting until conditions are right to move, not very successful. Rather, we have to realize there is no mechanism that if we were to get the right people together, if we were to get the right power players involved, then we'd get it together. If we had just enough support from the unions, if we just had this, there's no mechanical amount of reconfiguring the present constituencies in the United States and the present configuration of the government that's going to cause a change. Sometimes in history, it's a new idea which is capable of overturning, even with a seemingly small force. And that's where we find ourselves now. Rather, so the issue of how to make that idea powerful enough to overcome the current crisis is something which lies in understanding exactly what this crisis we find ourselves in today is. And that is something which lies not in the effects that we're all experiencing, 35% unemployment, probably more in the construction industry, anything that involves reproducing our current infrastructure, even manufacturing things that we don't really even need, even that's being shut down. That is not the crisis. That may be what most people experience as the crisis. But the crisis actually lies within an arc of development of the nation. The crisis lies in a crisis of the nation. And if we think about the most important parts of our nation's history, you'll find, if you look, that there's been certain turning points of development in technology, in infrastructure, and in production, where we've implemented someone's idea or discovery to manage a whole new territory that opened up then new possibilities for individual citizens, for private companies and so forth, to then act within that changed configuration. But it's always been that the process which built the nation, that's been the most important part. And a lot of these other battles that people are usually thrown at in the history textbooks of the most important turning points, a lot of them have actually not been the most important turning points in the nation's history. A lot of the small battles over different policy issues, different states, considerations, so forth, those have actually been kind of more smaller bumps on the road. But if you zoom out a bit and you look at the United States, you'll see that there's been actually big turning points that today are almost invisible to the general knowledge of citizens. If you want to turn on the first image that I had prepared for you, this is some data I got from the Army Corps office in New Orleans, which is all of the existing inland waterways. And the United States, 1600s, we conquered the waterways more effectively through high technology water wheels than anywhere in Europe. And the Saugus Iron Works up in Massachusetts only is typical of what were generally different sawmills going on in the 1650s, 1660s, which were so effective that Englishmen would come over to the United States, buy a sawmill, tear it down, and ship it back to England. Because our water wheel technology was so advanced, and that the very first pioneers in Dorchester, Massachusetts, they hauled this big water wheel and they got the axle set and they started using water power because you didn't want to have people pounding on the flour to. You want to consume that much of your actual mental capability of the limited citizens that you had, right? They were using windmills for the millstones in the Netherlands, which is actually where the first pioneer, one of the first pilgrims, came from. And the English at the time were actually using horses for their millstones. Now, we ended up asserting our sovereignty with respect to how we were going to build these things and organize the nation's resources by coming up with our own credit system. And we said, James II, your limitation upon our money is not illegitimate. So we actually founded the Pine Tree Shilling, which Cotton Mather reflected on in 1697 in a work and said, this was our sovereignty. We weren't going to be limited by this constriction, and we went ahead and did it. Now, after the 1789 founding of the Constitution, we immediately started up more control of our territory, largely spearheaded by what was the Cincinnati Society and the Army Corps of Engineers. In the first decade of the 1800s, well, Alexander Hamilton got shot, and him being the great leader of promotion of manufacturers, because we were largely still dependent on the British colonial system and having to buy manufacturers from them, and just being largely agricultural. It wasn't until Henry Clay that he fought to produce things in the United States, and he gave a very riveting speech in around 1807 where he had a plan for these new canals we needed and how we needed to finally break from the British. Well, it wasn't until they started stealing our sailors and looting us that we finally declared the Second War of Independence in 1812 to 15. We fought them. And it wasn't until after that that we finally then had the will, again, within our population to create the necessary future state. And that was then with the canal system. Now up here, you can see this is the Erie Canal. 1825 it was finished. And it came out of the fact that Henry Clay came in there with a whole new group of congressmen, and after the War of 1812 they did it. And it was 300-mile waterway. And this is actually New York. This is the Hudson River, Albany, Syracuse. This is what made New York City a big city. It wasn't until this waterway was created. And it was cut right across, right in the middle of New York there. And that opened up then a direct connection to the Great Lakes, where before it was $90 a ton to ship goods. And by building that canal, it went to $5 a ton. It wasn't until then that we actually opened up commercial farming as a valid possibility for the people out there. There's also the fact that it broke the reliance on the southern slaveholders for a market. And we finally then had these states, which were all critical in the Civil War. You go out, Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, was this. After 1825, JQA, as president, started developing the Ohio River. All of this was tamed. None of that's not just a river. This is a waterway. It's a navigable waterway. The Ohio River projects, which was supposed to connect directly to Lake Erie, but which, for some reason, didn't. People can look into that more. Or it may have, and it may have just... not been usable. What?
Railroads.
Okay, railroads. Here we can see Lake Superior down to, Lake Michigan, connecting straight to the Mississippi. That was the other thing that was then accomplished in the 1820s. And rail, also rail. I don't have that shown up here. Rail, first railroad, 1827, under the same JQA. And the rail was built along the canals. And so this inland waterway system made possible the existence of the nation. Without that, the nation wouldn't exist. Now, if you want to go to, actually, so in this period then, we had a break. Once the Second National Bank was taken down by Andy Jackson, and we had a break in capability to do certain things, even though we had a continuation of rail up until 1840 and more of the canal projects, until Lincoln came in and reasserted the national credit system and built the transcontinental rail system, we had a lull, right? And it wouldn't not have happened without a leader coming in and taking responsibility and spearheading and accomplishing the immortal feat that Lincoln did. Now, we continued some of these processes for a while, but we went into similarly a complete takedown of national interests with the assassinations of Lincoln, Garfield, and McKinley in 1901. And we went into a dark period of the United States in which Franklin Roosevelt was able to pull us out of it, again, an immortal feat. And if you go to the next image there. So this is all opened up. This part of the waterway system was all opened up through Franklin Roosevelt's TVA. This branch here, this branch there. This is the Mississippi River, the winding Mississippi. And up here, at the tip of Illinois, confluence of the Missouri River, the Mississippi River and the Ohio River. This is the Missouri. So you have St. Louis, a water town. Right? That's the only reason there's a town there. Largely, most of the cities in the United States depend on this inland waterway system. But here we have Kentucky Dam, right down the Ohio, leads then into the Tennessee River, and then down in Alabama. But that whole system was through the TVA. We made that possible. If you go to the next image, we also here, everybody in this city depends upon the Columbia River system. None of this was navigable. And the entire economies and existence of these states depend upon this structure. The Columbia River Project, which you can see from Portland up here, and then where the Snake River and the Columbia River meet, near here. Turn on the next image. This is the one, the Kennewick one. Yeah. There you are, right there. Oh, sorry. There you can see. So that's where we are there. So this process is what makes everything else in the economy possible. The individual person who has money and spends it and buys goods from the store is absolutely dependent upon the space which is created through these kinds of future-oriented ideas, which don't exist until we have a congruence between the will of the nation state as a whole and that idea, which is achieved through a certain amount of deliberation, which is how our Constitution works. It's not a set of rules, and through a transmittance of what is a necessary new idea for a certain population and its territory. Now, with the TVA, this led us to the nuclear age, and down by Norris Dam, we ended up setting up the city of Oak Ridge, and we built the nuclear age. All of that came out of that. Subsequently, not too long after, we had the space age, and we had the landing on the moon. Now, here we are today. We're at a situation where, in each period of the nation's history, when these processes, as I indicated to you, which are the most important, which are actually the steps in which a nation is built. When those break down, if the leadership is there, and if the will of the population is there to reflect upon what caused their existence, the generation before them doing something that made it possible for them to now do something ever more fruitful in their lives possible, then we pick back up the thread of the generations. So when that's happened, we've actually triumphed. But now we stand here today where since this, with the takedown of everything in the 70s, you can just say that the 70s were the takedown decade. After a real shock in the 60s of assassinations and other just general policy shift away from the national interest orientation and this exterior monetary impulse with the floating exchange rate, and also that was the beginning of the creation of what was referred to as an inter alpha group of banks. Royal Bank of Scotland, Banco Santander in Spain. These are all the ones that are now bankrupt and getting bailed out, which the Federal Reserve was just audited by Bernie Sanders' new initiative that he included in this bunk stimulus bill, financial reform bill that occurred a few months back, necessitated the Fed to make public where their money's going. Find out that while everybody has been losing their houses and businesses because the loans weren't going out for that part of the economy. Large amounts, I don't know what the exact percentage is, we're going to bail out these banks abroad. Not even national speculative banks. You could at least bail out our own speculators, right? But this was international. So that inter-alpha group of banks and the floating exchange rate system moved our application of our own resources of the nation into an intention which is not anything have to do with the intention of the nation state as a whole, or all the now dead people for the last 200 years who made everything possible for the present time. Built up the nation upon a nation which even could be speculated upon. The economy that could be speculated upon. And that's kind of the real sick irony of the whole thing. But now here we stand, since then, to the present day. It's 2010. 40 years. And the generation which is now up and coming to inherit the world has never had the experience of any of this. Not even the space program. And the baby boomer generation hardly had any experience of the space program either. Or at least the will to any continuing that was lost. So the ability to continue this process, the question is, what is the idea powerful enough to transform the current trends? What is the idea powerful enough to bridge that gap of generational knowledge, where we have a lot of people in their 70s and 80s who've experienced certain things, some who directly were involved in the TVA, or had family members and other people directly involved, or were directly involved in the space program. These people still exist. Or pioneered the new reactors, some of who we've shown on our website. In the EBR-2 in Idaho, the FFTF here in Hanford, and the Clinch River Breeder Reactor Project in Oak Ridge, which all of the cutting-edge technologies got shut down. But these people are around. They will not be around very soon. So the issue is we're at a point where what idea is powerful enough to change this? NAWAPA is. And I can say it is because it meets the standard of the necessary, it meets the standard of a scientific economic plan. All of these plans, all of these initiatives that I've mentioned, they didn't just improve the conditions for people, make it a little bit better. Can't you give us a little something around here? It's really tough for us around here. Can't you do that? That's can't you get a little something through the Congress for us here? Get some jobs for us, right? That's been the policy of the recent administrations in Congress. Well, that's not enough, because since the human species is dependent upon the application of technological principles which increase the density of action of those applied principles through technology, through increased efficiency of transportation of those goods, through the opening up of these new areas, which then give you cheap access to raw materials to put through that entire process, through infrastructure systems which manage those raw materials and manage the conditions for people in their everyday life. So rail, transportation, all of these things, those are all dependent on a certain level of technology. Now, you have to continually fueling that process, but you're not fueling that process just to maintain that present state. You have to increase to a higher state by hoping you will have some individuals in your society who are bright enough to find out that everything that we've been doing so far has been all wrong, and we have to come up with something new. And the conditions for that to occur don't exist in ghettos. They don't exist in, just being a barista at a Starbucks, or unemployed formerly having worked at Kinko's or something. The conditions in which to promote valid discoveries, such as we've seen the effects of here, are ones which must be created through really a promotion of not education for the sake of just doing them whatever I feel like doing, which is unfortunately the current standards of things. Even in the Congress, Nancy Pelosi feels something, and then you get the effects that you experience in your own economy because of it. But to be educated with a knowledge of where society has to go based on the discoveries of the past. And the United States and nation states in a whole were created to make discoveries that formerly had been abstractly flowing around. I wouldn't say abstractly flowing around, but unable to be assimilated into a population. If you think of Leonardo da Vinci, he had many discoveries, but they were unable to be implemented because society didn't exist in such a form that you could educate the population quickly enough to have that, incorporated into the society. Shakespeare's dramas, had they only had an education system around the nations of the time who could quickly assimilate the lessons of tragedy, they might have not carried them out. Those are the boundaries of the nation, and so if we don't overturn those boundaries with something new, NAWAPA does all of these things. If we look at it, we see, you could turn on the next image. So here's a screenshot of our 3D NAWAPA map, which here is unimpressively visible to you in 2D. But you can see the scope of it. 2/3 of the continent are covered through its management. The idea that occurred in whatever mind came up with this program was able to conceptualize all this territory as one unit of action. And the original idea was so efficient that the Army Corps of Engineers projects, if you listed them out, which totaled to about 3,000, garnered almost half of what this project does with only 369 parts, which is an order of magnitude for almost double the amount of water storage. The idea utilizes the natural topographical features of the continent, the natural climatological effects of the different regions, and by following this contour of the continent, which happens to have all of its mass up at the top, and that's where all the water condenses, which is related to that, and it's also related to how the ocean cycles flow, but all the water dumps to the north. Over 50%, if you take the amount of water in the 48 states, and you look at all the rain, if you look at the runoff, which is after it rains, you get a certain amount of infiltration, and you get a certain amount of then excess of that, and whatever is not evaporated or transpired by plant leaves takes the form of runoff, or it runs off, and that happens to be in Alaska. Over 50% of what runs off in the lower 48 states falls in that state alone. So it utilizes that fact for the creation of a new river, essentially a new. If you take the thing of the Mississippi River, the Mississippi River floods a lot, and it's difficult to deal with that. But a lot of the storage reservoirs that were a revolution in the 1920s, because nobody wanted to build storage reservoirs, they wanted to just build higher and higher levees. So you had a river running like an elevated highway through a state. But the creation of storage reservoirs, you're actually creating a river which is no longer just a wild river. It's not really a river anymore. It's a form of human creativity. You're managing now human society by creating something which still looks like a river, but it's not really a river anymore. And that's my point about NAWAPA, is we're creating that system now for the human species in a greater scale than we've ever done before, which is an achievement, therefore, of showing that we're capable of surviving. Because if we're not capable of carrying out a project which is necessary for the western half of the United States, is necessary for the opening up of Canada and managing all of Canada for the human species, we've really forgotten what it means to be the human species. We're not capable of doing things which are necessary. Now, why are they necessary? Well, NAWAPA will bring us into areas. If we look at the whole system of the North, there's nobody up there. I mean, have you ever looked at I can't turn it, but there's nobody in the northern, above the 48 states. And there's hardly anybody over here, too. Everybody's fled to the cities on the coast. And there's been a great exodus from the Midwest over the last 30 years. This would be something which would allow us to now be present in those regions, manage those regions as a scientific whole. We would have, under our observation, the greatest amount of experimental data in human history as one unit system. I think something that might be comparable is when we had a global system of magnetism experiments that gave us the first idea of the Earth's magnetic field, which we had to send explorers out from Germany to down in South America and around the United States and coordinate with our institutions here. All this data showed us something which we never could have done without having all of that. Obviously now we have satellites spinning around the Earth, and they're able to do a lot of interesting things with remote sensing technology and similar things which should be being done on other planets as well if we want to figure out how the entire solar system works for our benefit. Well, this system would be something that would be coordinated and coordinate the different geological data and all the flow rates and everything, and coordinating a system this big and being in all these new areas would itself be something which we've never considered. But consider this. In order to build this project, the population of the United States in general will have to recollect great projects like I've gone through here. Therefore, if we're going to build NAWAPA and we're going to see immediately a whole generation of youth finally involved in doing something productive, building something, being involved in a construction program, but not just fixing a bridge or tearing it down and building it back up, which is the Highway Act was that Obama put through a couple of years ago. And they tore bridges down around here even that were down in Oregon, which were not actually needed to be taken down. They were fine. But they tore them down and built them back up. This would not be that. This would be being involved in a project which encompasses Alaska, Yukon, British Columbia, Washington, Idaho, and you keep going down these states, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado. Suddenly the nation as a whole grips you. And you look at the program in detail. You go through everything. Suddenly a state next to a state, it's no longer a reason to have border conflicts, echoing back to the pre-constitutional days, which is something Hamilton writes about. And now it becomes a basis for collaboration, a reason again to be patriotic about your own state. But you follow the entire system. Suddenly, this project unites the nation to be once again conscious as a nation. And you become interested in the identity and of the people living in Arizona and what they're doing, what they're working on with the big reservoir system there. Lake Geneva would be the new name of the 121 million acre feet reservoir there. The Pecos River Reservoir in New Mexico. You get excited about this. You want to know what they're figuring out with this tunnel, the new geological find they just found out here. But largely the nation becomes alive. If that experience is something which we go through, rather than watching the people of Nevada, Utah, and Arizona, and California start killing each other over Colorado River water, which is the destiny of the population of the United States unless we build this, you could see, therefore, something capable of bringing back to life the nation as a conscious entity, and something which would be then capable of bringing, not just going back, but something which is going to lead us to new scientific breakthroughs. And if you notice anything about this map, how far away from the planet Earth do you have to get where you could actually see the whole project? Pretty far out, huh? So it also implies planetary management. It implies having a sense that we're tapping into figuring out and controlling our own atmosphere and utilizing all of these continent-wide type characteristics, which is something similarly we'd have to do if we ever wanted to actually figure out how the whole solar system worked to our benefit. That's what we'd have to do. And so NAWAPA meets that standard, and my goal and request for the people in this room is to make that grandfatherly act by looking at the youth generation today and the sorry baby boomer generation as well that has not as a generation succeeded, and make this last act for the young generation a gift to, rather than saying the political conditions do not exist for this project, we have to create the political conditions. We can't sit by and say, well, it's a great idea, but it won't happen. Make that grandfatherly act for my generation, which without you leading this and making this happen, and being the ones that may not be in the field, but for the first 5 years and 10 years of this project are going to have to oversee and manage it. And if we can accomplish this now, then the future will be with you. So thank you. Yeah?
One reason that we're in such a pickle nationwide and worldwide is we give it up leadership. And I admire this youth group stepping out, taking a leadership role to unite and integrate elements of the world that nobody else that I'm aware of is doing. G20 and the World Bank and fiddle with it, but nobody that has as productive an output as what you propose.
And that's what I am inviting you today to join in, is we have to take the responsibility ourselves and not wait or cower and wince in the face of this crisis. Those who can design the program, we make this an idea which is powerful enough to become seen as that which must be done. But I'd like to move to then our first invited speaker to present a contribution on some of the questions of, as we're taking up today, how we're going to implement this project. Let me just say first, for those of you who are not aware, we have on our website a discussion with scientists and engineers around the country presented daily in the form of interviews, and we have had many discussions with a lot of people, and those are available, and something that's an ongoing forum for those other people in the United States to witness and say, okay, that discussion, I can see, maybe I have something to add. Or that discussion, I can see that this project is something which is not an abstraction, but I'm going to get behind it. And the gap between absolute collapse and hyperinflation and failure after failure of the current axioms and the vividness and effectiveness of this other idea will cause some people at a certain point to say, all right, what the heck? I'm going with these guys. And that is what we're creating on our website. So that today we're continuing that process here in person. And I'd like to therefore invite Keith Smith to say a few remarks and see what people have to throw at him on machine tools.